relinquishing instructor power is a nice phrase, and it allows us to recognize the direction I'd like us to go in education, which is let it rest in peace. So let me get started. So let's see what's happening here, maybe. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to go a little bit wide and take it closer to home in the end, because that's the nature of learning, isn't it? So this is the top 20 skills that have been published. And at the time this was published is about 2018, sorry, I'm trying to keep up. In 2018. So the belief was that in 2020, these were the skills that would be needed in order for students to be successful in the future. And so you can see that none of them is like mathematics or anything like that. And as educators, we are not surprised. But increasingly, we are realizing that our education system isn't playing enough significance on this. It isn't pointing too much to these skills. It's assuming that by virtue of learning math, science, you will develop these skills in a natural way in one sense. So these are the skills that were identified as important. So one of the questions I'd like to just throw out to us as educators is, what do you believe about how kids learn best? What do you personally believe would be the important things in order for kids to learn best? So as we prepare educators to go out, what are the conditions we are asking them to be ensuring that these conditions are present in the environments that they're leading? You know, another question I'll throw out is, what conditions would need to be present for learning to take hold? So these are questions I want you to ponder a little. I don't need answers. I just want you to think about this as an educator. What do you personally believe about how kids learn best? Like when you think about it, what conditions need to be present? So when I asked these questions both these questions on a number of occasions, and all the time when I ask this question or these questions, the responses are like this. These are the responses I get: safe environment, personal investment, real world application, fun. These are the kind of things, autonomy and agency. And I'm supposing that as you thought about this, you'd be thinking along these lines. Maybe not necessarily exact words, but you'd be thinking in this way. These are the kind of things that need to be present in order for learning to take hold. Here is a list of things I never ever get from any person in any of the presentation. Never. In any presentation, no one has ever felt that these are the important things that are necessary for learning to take hold. These people are fundamentally clear in their head, they defend it. This one, no one ever says these. Standardized assessment, no real world application, age grouped, 60, 80-minute blocks, sitting in rows. None of these things are ever said. Yet, when we go into schools, is exactly what is happening. In a sense, what we are seeing, there's a disconnect between what is required for learning and what is happening in practice. It's no question. There's a disconnect between what is happening in learning, in terms of what the science of learning is, and what happens in practice. So in one sense, you could argue that schools aren't built for learning. Because when you look at what we fundamentally believe is necessary for learning, when you go into a school, that's not the setup for it. And what you see are considered to be valued for learning, those are not the things that are present most times in learning environments. Certainly when you work in national school systems, you don't see that kind of boundary pushing. And certainly as you move up the learning chain, for example, from kindergarten into elementary, into middle school, into high school, more and more schools move away from a learning model and less into a kind of, maybe what we'd say, opposite to it. Totally inimical to it. So one of the questions that we need to be doing as educators is to align our practice to what we actually believe. Okay, so I'm just throwing that out as something that a thought process that we really need to align our practice to our beliefs. So one of the things, as I said, I'm going to go a little bit and then I'll come back in. An interesting phrase that I picked up from Will Richardson. He was at the IB conference in Vienna. And he said, learning is what happens all the time. when there's interest. All right, when there's interest. If there's interest, learning happens all the time. It's a nice graphic. Why do we teach like this when learning is like this? If you look at a classroom, for the most part, our educators are expecting to go and set classrooms or put people in row. But we as educators know that learning is much more like this. Students working with students. Let me get my students working with students here, maybe going to see someone else who is on the web, another person sitting by themselves, groups, connections being made. All this is happening in a classroom. That's really how learning works for us as well. If we're given the chance to learn, we don't really want this. So why do we teach like this or prepare people to teach like this when in reality, this is what learning looks like? So that's just a thing to think about. I'm going to share a little video to take you closer to where I'm going. I'm going to share two videos. I hope they work because when I go on Zoom, sometimes they don't. I don't know if you've seen this before, but it's a little video that it's something that I think it's worth looking at when we consider the learning process and maybe as we think about what the MYP is about. So let's have a look. Hope it's working. Shannon, just let me know if it's working. Okay.
Look at the one that made it, watching all the other ones. Oh. Look at that. Oh my God. Oh, they're trying so hard.
Should we help them?
No. they're giving up. Their mom better come down the stairs.
Nope. They'll figure it out.
Yeah, it's so cute. Scared. I feel like being far away is better. I get a view of all of them. They're doing it. Look at them. Some of them. She's just gonna leave them. Oh, the lad. There we go. Last one. Oh. She knows. How cute is that? Yeah.
Sorry. Now, I share this only because it fits in the philosophy of the idea that learning is not linear, and in the middle of that learning process, you could very well look at the teacher. Let's assume that it's the person there. You could assume that that person, you could walk in and even evaluate that person and say, what a bad teacher. Half the kids are not learning, half is doing it, half is not. What's going on? But what we're seeing and what I'm trying to share is a philosophy of learning that says we take them into places, but they have to find their own pathways and they have to develop that kind of agency in order for them to be successful, because that experience will stay with them as they work it out. And as they go back to other steps, we expect these doctrines now to know exactly how to approach it. So this is, if you notice, there's no one, the mother duck just took them into the situation, or the father duck. I got in trouble for saying it's some mother duck once. I'm not sure what gender it is, but the leader here in this case has made a decision that today is the day that they learn to climb stairs. And if it takes all day, you're going to learn. I'm going to just bring you into the situation and leave them there. Let them work through it and figure it out. So that's something that I wanted to share. The second thing I'm going to share is what I refer to as the best homework assignment I've ever assigned in my life. So in my first year of working at this school, I actually joined this school as a science and mathematics teacher. But really, I am a mathematics teacher. My background in science is maybe no more than yours, high school science, and that was it. But in trying to secure the job, there was a space for a science teacher as well. Someone would teach math and science together. That was the gap that existed. I really, really wanted to work at this school, so I took the job. And in many ways, I felt I was taking a downgrade as well, because I don't normally teach students of that age. This was a grade 6 class. Anyway, I'm teaching science, and by teaching science and not being familiar with science, I really found out that I had a knowledge gap. But that really impacted my teaching in a positive way. Because normally when I teach math, my approach and maybe my reference point would have been to the fact that I've learned math. I know how people learn math, and I taught math with that knowledge. And certainly over the years, I would have adjusted my practice in order to reach learners who were not maybe equally as competent or engaged or motivated as I was when I was learning math. But teaching science was a whole different ballgame. I didn't have any reference point. In fact, my memory of science was that it was difficult. So as I was teaching with that mindset or that memory, I approached my teaching with a lot more open-minded. I was really more open-minded. And so in reference to the best homework I've ever assigned, so I was teaching matter. And as I was teaching the class, what happened was we were talking about, the different states of matter. And as we were talking about it, one student came up to me quietly and she said, she's currently in grade 12 now. This is grade 6. It's 6 years ago. And she said to me, Mr. Barker, I just wanted to find out if when matter changes state, so whether it moves from solid to liquid to gas, does it also change its weight? Now, obviously the correct word is mass, but she said weight. She said, when it changes its state, does it also change the weight? And I'm going to be honest with you, I did not know the answer to the question. I really did not know. It's just one of those things that I just did not know from a scientific perspective. So here I was in the classroom being asked a question by the students. One student, it was private, so it wasn't embarrassing in any way. And I just did not know the answer. So what did I do? In that instant, I think I realized I didn't know. And I just said, why don't we find out? So I said to her, why don't we find out? And I said, as soon as I said it to her, it dawned on me then that I wonder if I could just set this as a homework task. Now, so I called the class together and I said, hey, everyone, listen up. Mervat just came to me and she asked me this question. When matter changes state, does it also changes its weight? Is it a different mass? Is it a different mass? Does it change from state to state? And I said, listen, I don't really know the answer. Now, when I say that to students, they may not believe me. They may think I'm just saying that as a teacher, but I literally didn't know it. And I said, I don't know the answer, but here's what I'm going to ask you to do. When you go home tonight, I'd like you to devise an experiment and test this hypothesis. Just test it. Whatever you think is going to happen, just test it. And then I'd like you to provide some evidence of what you did. Now, what I'm going to show is a very short 1-minute video of a student who went home, and I had to just search my emails to see if I could find something, because before that we weren't even using Google Drive, but luckily she sent it through an old email, and I found this one from Rima, and she sent it to me. But I just want you to see the level of engagement in a task that just came from classroom practice, and this was homework. And then you'll see where I'm leading with this. So let me see what happens if I press go. So she chose ice. This is 6 years ago. So this is not even in the age of saying no when everything's happening. So And this is homework. This is after school. Now, her hypothesis was that it would change. I have subsequently found out that it shouldn't change. But our conversation afterwards, when she presented this and everyone presented, really was where the science really happened. That's really when the science happened. Because one, people were talking about, you know, what if some of it evaporated? You know, people were talking about a lot of things that I didn't have to bring into the conversation. The fact that all the students went out and were willing to share. Someone used chocolates as their thing. One child questioned, why did she use so many cubes? Why didn't she just use one? One child asked, why didn't you just put it in the microwave? Why did you have to wait so long for it to melt? Just melt it in the microwave. So there was a lot of, but the interest, and I felt I've never forgotten this task because of its spontaneity and the fact, the level of engagement. There were kids who spent over 3 hours working on this task in the evening. Then they made the video, edited the video, and submit this. And there was no marks. I didn't give any marks for it. I didn't say you're going to get an A for this. It was literally a task. But the level of agency and the level of engagement that happened was really something that has stayed with me as an educator. And I always pointed, they say they don't want to do homework, but maybe what we set for homework or what we ask them to do is not maybe something they're interested in. Tells you the importance of interest. So I shared those to give you an idea of where I'm going with this. So I refer to this as a ubiquitous pedagogy, simply because the word pedagogy is used in education quite freely. And in general, we see pedagogy as the learner as a dependent on the educator who decides what, where, and when the students will learn. It is certainly the case in most schools. And in some schools, they'll tell you how you have to teach it as well. In some schools, they tell you how you have to teach it as well. Now, if we think about the word pedagogy and its etymology, it really creates a hierarchy between children and teachers. In fact, the history of the word means meaning child and goji meaning a teacher. So it's really child or boy teacher. And the idea is that there's someone who knows more than the other person, who is providing this opportunity to learn. So while the word pedagogy has transcended its original meaning, its history is still honored in the way how schools employ this worldwide. Educators prefer to define pedagogy as the manner in which learning is shared rather than its more specific meaning. So now we speak about pedagogy more from the perspective of saying it is the science and the art of teaching. Now we say that. So we'll just say pedagogy is the science and the art of teaching, but the origins of the word itself was really a relationship between someone who knows and someone who didn't know. And the person who knew was guiding the person who didn't know. That's the nature of the relationship. So what happened there, we used to have a teacher who would teach people. That's the idea behind pedagogy. The point is, over time, that word has been used to become much more as a definition of the science of teaching. Now, there are educators who actually, and researchers who are now challenging that, not now, but in the last 10 years, questioning whether seeing pedagogy in its original form as part of a continuum of learning design, which is what I'm going to share and say how the IB is showing this way. So what they have is 3 different kinds of orgy, ologies, if you want to call it, 3 different parts of the continuum. So what we're talking about here is we have pedagogy, which is children learning. Then there's something called andragogy, which is about how adults learn. If you think about it, and I'll go further in one of the slides, Adults learn different, have different motivations for learning. I mean, you're teaching adults, the approach that you use for students is a different approach to learning. You try to get, you know that they want to be there. They might have made the choice for what they want to study. Students don't. And many students will say, why am I learning this? You'll not maybe have adults asking that. They maybe will see the relevance of what they're learning for effectiveness later in their professions or in the jobs that they choose. So the teaching, the approach, the pedagogy, if I allow me to use that word loosely, is different when you teach. So that is called andragogy in the research. And then there is an area of learning that is called heutagogy, which is emerging. That's coming out of the work of Hayes and Canyon. And this is talking about self-determined learning, which is seen as a further level on the continuum, where the learner determines and is autonomous in what they choose to learn in order to develop certain understandings. And I'll go a little further, but Hayes and Canyon is where this, and Kenyon is where this kind of thinking came out of. And I want to share this because I think the IB and the MYP is pushing into that area without acknowledging it. And as a practitioner for a number of years, I'm seeing more and more of this. So Hayes and Canyon, who I'd say is the father of this era, they say, for example, and so we're thinking, it is possible to acquire a set of competencies where one can repeat where I can repeat these competencies in familiar. Sorry, one sec. Repeat these competencies in that one can repeat in familiar or known circumstances. However, if learning has taken place, competencies can also be repeated and even adapted in unfamiliar and unanticipated situations. So they are making a difference between learning to do something and maybe capability, the ability to apply that. Now, this might seem like we're slicing salami here, but the reality of it is that for many, learning, for people to move into the unfamiliar, unanticipated situations, a different kind of environment, a different kind of learning conditions have to be created for that to happen. For the most part, what we do now in many schools that I know, for example, in national systems, you study for a test that everyone knows what the questions will be about. And we know the content that we are going to study for. So in a sense, we're teaching them to prepare for familiar circumstances. I carry on. So I mentioned andragogy. Andragogy refers to adult learning that is partially self-directed. It calls for an emphasis on educational process rather than content, and where the curriculum, importantly, is about relevance. And the modes of teaching will promote more about discovery, which you will do with your educators and your educators in training, because you're going to want them to be, that's why we have practicum and stuff like that. And the different backgrounds of students are considered whenever we design teaching and curriculum. For example, at the moment, my wife is doing an MBA. Because of the current situation, she's doing it online, and she's in a class that has different people who are doing MBA from different parts of the world. Now, they're all coming from different areas. Some are coming from business, which is logical. Some are coming from a more finance background. She's coming from an educational background. Now, they have to design an MBA to include all of the different experiences so that the students can see the relevance in their learning. In the past, maybe an MBA is just go and study these specific things. So there's a lot more opportunities here. And this is what andragogy was about, to say that we can design adult learning, which is different and partially self-directed. In a heutagogical approach to teaching and learning, learners are highly autonomous and self-determined, which is different from self-directed. See, self-directed is still coming somewhat from the teacher. Self-determined is I am making decisions about what I learn and maybe how I learn it, and perhaps when I learn it. And that's more like, for example, when someone is doing a doctorate, in a sense, it's self-determined learning. It's research. You make the decisions on most things, and even when you start and when you finish, it's totally in your control. While if you're in a master's program, or even, you might make these decisions are directed towards you. Sometimes in some schools, it's self-directed, which is why some people may not finish. An emphasis is placed on the development of learner capacity and capability with the goal of producing learners who are well prepared for the complexities of today's workplace. So it's important that this is the idea behind heutagogical approach. There is this piece about the authenticity of the learning. They need to be prepared for the complexities of today's workplace. So here's our thing, a line in the sand to help to kind of just share the differences between them. It's really a line in the sand. I suppose there will be practice that overlaps and maybe areas that educators and researchers will say, but they are one and the same. But there's some degree that shows a movement from one part of the spectrum, from a pedagogical approach to a heutagogical approach to learning. Where when you think of pedagogical approach, learner focus to more of a learner-centered approach, moving across in this way. So for example, we look at dependence. The student is dependent on the teacher for learning in this case. The teacher determines what, when, and how anything is learned. In a pedagogical approach, the resources, the teacher decides on all of those. In reasons for learning, normally it is to advance to the next stage. It's subject-centered, prescribed curriculum. This is the nature of a pedagogical approach. And if you go into the majority of schools and national systems, this is what happens. The motivation in the most cases is external, it's extrinsic. I'll get in trouble if I don't go to school. There are laws against me going to school or not being in school. My parents want me to go to school. My teacher says I should be going into school. I'm doing this to get, when we move across, for example, in an adult learning environment where there's a bit of self-direction, it's internal. Adults go to education for the most part for self-esteem, recognition, confidence, becoming more effective in their workplace. The tasks are slightly different. Adults learn when they experience a need to know or to perform more effectively. So people will go back to study because they feel there's a gap. They think they want to learn more, or it might be to move on up to have greater influence. There's a climate of collaboration here. While here, the role of the teacher designs learning process, imposes material, and is assumed to know more than learners. Now remember that this is in the construct of pedagogy as a child-centered approach where the teacher is the person who knows. As we move across on the continuum, and it is debatable whether it is really a continuum, it's really a debate on that. The idea is that there is more relinquishing of the instructor power happening. And if we're talking about education and saying what we believe would be the factors that would determine more sustained and deep and profound learning, it's going to happen when we design and have a mindset or a mind frame that has these happening in terms of the roles of the learner or the factor in education that we're looking at. So this is like a line in the sand. I'm certainly not arguing that this is the full piece to it. There's another, this is another representation in a simpler form. The PAH continuum. The person was actually made the case that it is a continuum. Garnett and O'Byrne in this book. This is a book that's a chapter book with a number of pieces of work on heutagogy and lifelong learning. So there's a number of articles and research around that. So we talked about here pedagogy, andragogy, heutagogy, and locus of control. So I mentioned teacher. So you can see a transferal in the different philosophies, different ideas from, notice education is school, determines what's happening, then the adult determines, and then here it goes into research. People are trying to find out, it's self-determined. It's self-determined. Cognition, metacognition, finding meaning, really finding meaning. Here we're reflective, thinking deeply about what we learn. But here we're trying to find meaning, like really going deeper to say, what do things really mean and what is it? And so on. So again, I'm just pointing that, but there's this idea that maybe as we try to frame our own philosophy of education, we'll find that it is less pedagogic and more heutagogic. And in that sense, once we begin to put a name and begin to study that a little bit more, we might be able to articulate that in a way that learners can then move from our experiences or our shared experiences to becoming more impactful practitioners. It's another quote. And it's talking about something called the difference between heutagogy and others. It's not a single loop model of learning in which learners identify a problem, take actions, and then produce an outcome. That's a single loop. They refer to that as a single loop. It begins with a new problem and then begin with a new problem again. Double loop learning encourages students to reflect on their learning, to assess how it has changed their beliefs and actions, and how they can apply what they have learned to other areas. So there's a difference so after you have completed the first loop, double loop learning wants learners to then think about, how am I changed? What am I going to do about these things and my beliefs now? With this new belief, what am I going to do? And so as we move forward, we're starting to see how a heutagogic approach can create the space for an integration of things like sustainable development goals into practice. How we are looking at situations that exist in the real world and saying, can I integrate this? Can I infuse this into a curricular practice that allows students to maybe intentionally try to solve world problems in their classroom or out of it, but out of a changed belief about what they need to be doing in the world. Now, international schools, that's the nature of an international school. And so I'm going to segue nicely. So this is a pyramid of how it is set up into the MYP program model, in the sense that the MYP program model, the way it is designed, is I believe, is less a pedagogical approach to learning, or pedagogical in its historical, in its original context, and more heutagogic in its structure. And you'll see, based on the things that I've laid out at the beginning, you'll see how that comes through the MYP in its setup. So for people who are familiar with the MYP, bear with me a little. So one of the key things that I'd say is that the MYP places the learner profile at the center of the model. There's a reason for that. You know, it could be anywhere, it could be in any part of it, but it places at the center because ultimately the purpose of education is to transform people, is to allow them to have changed beliefs, have views about what they believe in, and act in concert with that. And so the focus of the MYP is about the learner profile, ensuring that the experiences that students are faced in an MYP is that they go off developing different aspects of the learner profile. Now, the learner profile has 10 facets to it. And when teachers are designing the learning experiences, what they're thinking about is, how would this impact on the different aspects of the learner profile? So the tasks that students are placed, are given, the tasks that students are assigned, they're allowed to think deeply about how they are transforming their thinking, and allows them to think in that way. The program is then, the next level of that is approaches to learning. And you'll see a connection between the approaches to learning and the IB learner profile, because the approaches to learning are a set of skills. The IB has identified 10 skill categories, which I'll share in a bit. And within that, there's over 193 indicators of those skills, which are divided into 10 areas, 10 clusters. We can read about that. The main thing is that there's a connection between these skills and how we develop these learner profile traits. The other thing that's important is the use of concepts. So the model, as you see it, it reflects what is important within the program. So conceptual learning is integral to the program, and contexts are considered to be critical. So there's nothing here for content, because content is delivered within context and through concepts. So content is always delivered within contexts and through concepts as a big idea, allowing learning to be shared through different subject areas and in bigger ideas, you know. So the approaches to teach is also, you know, matches what happens in the approaches to learning, to ensure that the conditions are present for students to develop these learner profile traits. If you're not familiar with it, service as action, the idea between service is that service should naturally emanate from teaching practice. So as teachers are planning their units of work, they should be considering what service opportunities might come from this learning. Because again, we're trying to develop learners who will have changed beliefs and will be imbued to act. They feel like they need to do something about things. And that's why one of the things that we're doing is beginning to link the sustainable development goals to units of work. So teachers are beginning their units of work with the idea that the work that students are going to do may impact the sustainable development goals. And so that's the connection between service and what they're learning. And what IB is doing slowly, it wasn't the case before, it is service as action, where service is seen as an actionable thing and not something you do on the side. The personal project is a research that every student has to take on. And I can tell you, it's a 3,500 word research. And I remember when I was at high school, I never submitted a piece of work. And this is a totally self-determined act. Students choose their topic, students choose their product, students choose the time. There is some constraint on time, but for our school, they have over a year to work on their project. They choose almost every aspect of it. The only parts that's prescribed is maybe how they present the work. And in fact, I'm talking about the report itself, even though they still have the option to write a report or even speak a report, or choose a language that they're comfortable to present that report in. So there's a lot of freedom within the personal project. And in many ways, it exemplifies the entire program because it is a self-determined piece of work. The subjects, balanced, every area is covered, and there's the international mindedness piece, which really is an important part of the IB in terms of what it considers to be important. So I mentioned the learner profile. So here are the 10 learner profile traits. Effectively, the IB believes and the MYP promotes these as essential characteristics of a lifelong learner, of someone who will have an impact on the world. And if you look at the different aspects of it, you'll see how they connect together to create a whole person. I mean, us as adults, if we feel that we are functioning at the optimal level in all of these, then we know that we would be great value to our teams, to society, to our families, to ourselves. And so there's the opportunity to be reflective. And so throughout the units, the opportunity exists, is being created, is being designed into the learning experience for teachers, for students to be developing these. There's no assumption that they come with these skills. And that is developed through our ATLs, the approaches to learning skills. I mentioned before, there are 5 big categories, and within those categories, there are what we call clusters. Inside of these clusters, we have in total 193 indicators of, say, critical thinking. So as teachers, you're looking for those, and that's what teachers teach. So teachers in an MYP will identify a skill that they're going to teach, and that is more important than the content. The IB doesn't require you to maybe provide the content you're going to teach, but certainly there's a check on the skills that you teach. And so teachers will explicitly teach a skill as part of the unit, up to 2. In my school, I say up to 2. 2 skills that they will teach, identify a mode in which they're going to teach that skill, but they're not required to assess the skill, because the idea is that it's important that they are exposed to the skill and develop those skills through a continuum, through what we call an ATL skills development chart. So over time, they move through being a learner from a beginner to a learner to a practitioner to an expert over time. So there's no need for teachers to spend time trying to assess them as beginner or anything, but we expose them to the skill. And then over time, they're exposed again to the skill. And each time there's an increasing level of challenge in applying that skill. So something like critical thinking could be seen in science or even in mathematics. But we're looking at indicators of critical thinking, and we teach those skills explicitly. Now, how teachers have an idea of students' acquisition of the skill is in the summative task, the task that is done at the end of the unit. The tasks are designed so that students' level of acquisition of the skill would have an effect on how well they perform on the task. So in a sense, if they're learning critical thinking as a skill, the task that is given at the end to assess their learning would require a high level of critical thinking, or at the level that is age appropriate for them to be successful in the task. And so you can have some feedback on their thinking skills based on what they're doing, but we do not give a grade for their thinking skills. So this is the ATL skills, and that's available online and in IB published documents. The next part that is important in an MYP is the concept-based approach to learning. Now, the IB is very, very keen on the idea of concept-based approach because it allows for interdisciplinary interactions between different subjects. The other part of it is that it is transferable. It's not situated in a subject area. So it allows the learners to have a different lens in looking at different content. So in a sense, the concept provides a lens for people to experience the learning. And so what you have is the IB provides 16 concepts. It goes further. It also assigns some of these concepts to different subject areas. So different subjects would have different concepts, and there's also an overlapping of concepts. So you find, for example, something like relationships would exist in mathematics, but also exist in, say, science or INS. And so students are beginning to explore the meaning of the word relationships as a concept, not only in a mathematical context, but really what it means and how that allows them to understand the world through the idea of relationships. So for example, and then you see something like systems maybe would be in INS, which is humanities, so like geography, history, and science. So we're talking about, for example, family systems, but maybe in science, they're looking at the digestive system. But if students understand systems, then they'll understand that there are certain features of a system that are present not only if it is in science, but so there's a deeper understanding, which allows for application and transferring of information and allowing students to solve problems which are outside of their familiar experiences. So this is where the IB cracks this, and this is not unique to the IB. This is the IB taking a piece of study, research, and building that within the MYP in its practice. And so what you're seeing again is the same idea of students working in unfamiliar situations and making decisions about how and what they learn. The final piece I'll share with you is the inquiry cycle. Now, this is really the inquiry cycle in the IB. It's not a flashy diagram. This is something that the IB practitioners would be familiar with. So the MYP uses this simple three-stage diagram to depict the complex inquiry cycle. Inquiry underpins MYP practice and drives a unit of study for learners. In MYP units, learners formulate and explore factual, debatable, and conceptual questions through this simple diagram. So you'll see you go from inquiry to action, action to reflection, reflection to inquiry, or reflection back to action. So that kind of interplay is always happening. Action back to inquiry. The minimalistic depiction of this inquiry cycle affords for both learner and facilitator mutual control of the learning experience. It provides multiple opportunities to reshape the unit, refocus the inquiry, revisit ideas, and respond to new learnings. In this way, without heralding a paradigm, the IB doesn't say it's a heutagogic program. It doesn't herald a paradigm. The MYP exemplifies a heutagogic framework where instructor power is relinquished and transferred to learners, solidifying their agency and bolstering their self-efficacy. So that's me sharing my thing. It's about self-efficacy and effectiveness. Thank you. I hope that, thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Megel. I've been listening to parts of you do this presentation over the years, I think, and being familiar, but it's exciting to hear you and be a part of our team. Maybe we can all share a little bit of feedback, what we connected with, or ask questions. You know, it's not new to put the IB learner profile at the center. You know, that's not a new concept. That's been around for a long time. We're all really familiar with that. But I think that the context of these days, it's really standing out to me. So that's really what I really connected with today. And so I'm wondering, colleagues, what would you like to share connections or questions with Dr. Barker now while we have him online? Please join in.
Shall I start?
Please.
Especially when point come to the science education, we have pedagogy, of course, for the subject teaching, and we are heavily emphasizing this system thinking approach, because the environmental matter, health issues, we don't have any other way around. And but to give an example of this digestion system, if we taught this each part separately, it is not working. And then when we ask the student questions, they cannot answer. And it's quite a running pedagogy going to the top and the peak nowadays, system approach. And in the science education pedagogy, especially, we are grabbing this idea starting from the kindergarten, because without seeing the system in general aspect, holistic approach, it is difficult to see it. And thank you for touching it. And I'm also happy this is a part of the IB curriculum. And I like it a lot. Thank you. And, yeah. It's a very useful, I get a lot. Thank you very much. And I like also that teaching the concept in the content is also making the learning meaningful. That is very important. Yeah.
So, actually, science is a great field for us to see those concepts, right? So in those list of I think it was 10 different approaches, we saw change. There were other key concepts that are easy to pull from science and then try to connect with other areas. And I'm hoping that as we move to a designated team, those can be alive conversations we're having all the time, so that we can even connect with English and history. Miguel, I'm wondering if you have any experience with that in working with a team in a transdisciplinary unit that way. I hope that we have teams that are meeting occasionally to talk. Mostly it's our pedagogy people connecting with others. We have English and social studies sometimes that are connecting with democratic citizenship. But I'm wondering, what does it look like for MYP teachers in your school as they do planning together? What does that look like?
All right, so it's funny because today is the day we launched that aspect of the program, because so the IB, this is designated within the MYP. Students are required to experience at least one interdisciplinary unit in each year of study of the MYP. So in grade 6, they should have an IDU, we call it, and so on, all the way through. So they should have experienced at least 5 by the time they finish their learning. Departments are required to produce at least 1 every year. So there are some requirements in the MYP that are already there to force the idea of an interdisciplinary unit. The problem that schools face is trying to implement this. The difficulty is that for an interdisciplinary unit to work, different subject areas have to finish at the same time, finish a unit at the same time, and then begin that unit of work together. They also need to have the same number of hours available to devote to an IDU, and then have the time to mark it and then pick up. I'm just sharing how teachers view it. So what I did after a number of years of leaving it to people doing this, and we had some successes, but not the kind of systemic successes that I wanted to have. We have now moved it to a different approach. So I can share what we're doing in my school at the moment. So we've created this lesson that's called MS Solves, which is Middle School Solves. And Middle School Solves happens every week in school. And 2 hours are allocated for it, where students will work on an interdisciplinary task, which is set by different departments. So today the departments met. I randomly placed teams together. So for example, I had the language team working with the English language team working with the science, and trying to remember what they said they're going to do. I think the students are going to do a product pitch that's based on an environmental concern, solving a problem in science, but they're going to use, so the content would be persuasive writing and presenting, and the science would be the arguments for and so on. So they're doing that. That's not my doing. They just said that to me. That's what we're going to do. I randomly place the teams together. I give them the time. I give them 4 consecutive weeks of a 1 hour time that I would normally meet with them. I say, use this time, the two teams are meeting together, and they know that that's the time for them to plan. We have math working with humanities. I haven't heard what manner of, what they're coming up with. So math is working with the humanities, and I'm trying to remember who else. Music is working with design. And if I remember the other two subjects, they're working with each other. It will soon come back to me. But yes, so the point is that all the subjects are paired like that. That's my doing, because I realized that by leaving it to subjects to do it on their own, it just wasn't happening. So in practice, I prescribe that, but then I leave them to come up with whatever they want to do, including whether it is for grade 6, grade 7, grade 8, whether it is supposed to be 8 weeks or 2 weeks, whether it is to be done independently by students, or whether it should have teacher facilitation. In fact, the last part of it, I haven't spent a lot of time on, which is the assessment of it, because I'm firmly of the belief that students should be able to do work and be given meaningful work without having to know whether they did bad or good on it. Because the learning is more important than whether we can put a number beside their names. So one of the things I've taken from teachers is worrying about marking the work. Because once the students engage in this regularly, if you do it once, then you need to mark it. But if you give them a lot of exposure to this, then they're exposed to it and they'll develop the skills and will apply that, and we'll see that in the learning. So that's how we're doing it in our school, because I had to find a way around the logic of school. School is a very busy place.
So Miguel, I know our time is coming close here, and I want to give my colleagues a chance, but I do want to hear your voice on this topic. So let's imagine you contact me in a year or two when we have graduates graduating our program, and you'd say, Shannon, I really want to look at hiring some of your teachers who will be teaching grades 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. What are you looking for? Why would you what would you really hope to find in a teacher that you could hire from us?
Okay, so I'm currently in the hiring phase. So I'll maybe share the questions I ask, because we look at resumes, obviously, but we are not really looking for MYP trained teachers, because we believe that in our environment, the conditions are right for people to get to that kind of practice. We can send them on a training for 2 days and then they're fine. One question I ask is this. I say, describe for me, I said everyone has their philosophies about how learning happens, but could you describe for me a lesson that you have delivered that you believe would demonstrate to me the things that you believe are important in the learning process? So they're going to pick the lesson, they walk me through that lesson, and through their example, I'm not limiting that, what they believe is a learning, truly, I learn from them what their philosophies are. So that's my spin on the standard, what is a good lesson? So rather than ask for that question, I do that. For new teachers, I think I'd like to know what their philosophies are. Obviously, new teachers are in a different space. They don't have the experience, or maybe not even sure what that is. So I might maybe shift that a little, but that question is still from their practicum. They might share an experience that they had that they felt learning really happened. You know, and so the idea is for them to share their beliefs, because I'm really big on teachers' beliefs and trying to making sure that both beliefs and actions are in the same place. You know, and it leads to another question I ask for teachers, which is to give me 3 words that their peers would use to describe them, 3 words that their colleagues would use to describe them, and 3 words that their managers would use to describe them. Now, that seems like a hard question, but in reality, it should be the same 3 words if you think about integrity.
Great. I've used the same. So colleagues, do you have any questions, comments that you want to share in our closing time together? So we actually have a course that's called Professional Identity that our students take every year that is placed alongside their practicum experiences. So it really fits with this action, inquiry, reflection cycle. So our program isn't designed to train MYP teachers, but there's so many aspects of our program that we're including. I would just say that, yeah, we're looking to, I like this idea of a transdisciplinary unit. I think it's a rare experience in schools that actually they apply this because of the time. And I think there's a lot of creativity in it. You kind of learn collaboration through this intention. So, Miguel, do you have any closing thoughts about anything?
No, I'm fine. I think just thanks for everyone listening. Yeah, thanks for having me. Great to see you. And as I said to Shannon, I don't think I've come across a program where people are training teachers to work in the international school. That's certainly more like a mystery more than a puzzle to solve. So in that sense, I'm sure you're all learning along the way and figuring it out. So I applaud you for taking that on. Not anyone takes that challenge on. So
thank you so much, Miguel. Really, this has been a great start for us on a Monday morning. And thank you for sharing all your resources and being so generous with us.
thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Hope you have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Thank you, Miguel.